Elvis Presley was censored on national television, with cameras only showing him from the waist up. Religious groups burned his records in public demonstrations. Ed Sullivan once declared he would never allow Presley on his show, then paid him a record-breaking $50,000 for 3 appearances. The FBI kept a file on Elvis after his television performances sparked national outrage. Welcome to the shocking world of early Elvis on TV, where America's moral panic unfolded in living rooms across the nation. Number 6. The Steve Allen Show, July 1st, 1956. Elvis Presley stood awkwardly on the Steve Allen Show stage wearing a formal black tuxedo with tails and a white bow tie. Next to him sat a basset hound wearing a top hat. The rock and roll sensation was about to perform Hound Dog to the dog itself. This bizarre scene wasn't Elvis's idea. It was host Steve Allen's deliberate strategy to tame the controversial performer who had scandalized America just weeks earlier on the Milton Berle Show. Allen, a musician himself who preferred jazz to rock and roll, later admitted, "I wanted to make sure he dressed right, so I put him in a tuxedo." For Elvis, this appearance represented a public humiliation. The tuxedo restricted his movements, and singing to a dog turned what was meant to be a passionate rock song into a comedy routine. Behind the scenes, Elvis was furious, reportedly telling TV producer Hal Cantor later that evening, "I've never been so embarrassed in my life. I will never do another TV show." Despite his embarrassment, Elvis delivered a performance that satisfied the network. The ratings were enormous, with Allen's show beating Ed Sullivan's in the Sunday night ratings battle for one of the few times in television history. Allen's strategy worked exactly as planned. Elvis appeared, brought viewers, but was effectively neutralized as a controversial figure for that appearance. The studio audience reacted with laughter and applause, treating Elvis more as a novelty act than the musical revolutionary he was becoming. Critics praised Allen for taming Elvis with variety writing. Allen proved that Presley could be contained. What many viewers didn't realize was that Elvis had recorded a faster, more aggressive version of Hound Dog earlier that same day at the RCA Victor Studios in New York. The contrast between the raw energy of the recording session and the Skyhigh TV performance highlighted the cultural battle taking place. Elvis was pushing boundaries while the entertainment establishment was trying to maintain control. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, allowed the humiliating appearance to happen, recognizing the value of the exposure despite the artistic compromise. This pattern would repeat throughout Elvis's career, commercial opportunities often taking precedence over artistic integrity. The day after the Allen Show, Elvis returned to the recording studio and channeled his frustration into what became one of his most energetic recording sessions. The juxtaposition of these events shows how television both elevated Elvis to national prominence while simultaneously working to constrain the very elements that made him revolutionary. Number 5. The Dorsey Brothers Stage Show, January 28, 1956. Before Milton Berle, before Ed Sullivan, there were the Dorsey Brothers. On a cold January evening in 1956, Elvis Presley made his national television debut on Stage Show, a CBS program hosted by big band leaders Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey. The appearance marked the true beginning of Elvis's television career, though few realized its historical significance at the time. The Dorsey Brothers Stage Show was not a top-rated program. It aired Saturday evenings at 8 p.m., competing against the popular Perry Como show on NBC. The Dorseys, jazz musicians, whose heyday had been in the 1930s and 40s, were struggling to stay relevant in the changing musical landscape of the 1950s. Colonel Tom Parker, always strategic, saw the show as the perfect entry point for Elvis, significant enough to reach a national audience but not so high profile that a poor reception would damage Elvis's career prospects. Parker negotiated a multi-appearance deal, with Elvis eventually performing on 6 consecutive episodes between January and March 1956. For his debut, Elvis performed Shake, Rattle and Roll, and I Got a Woman. Dressed in a flashy sport coat with dark pants, Elvis appeared relatively tame compared to his later performances. Yet even this reserved Elvis sent shockwaves through the audience. His movements were subtle by later standards, a shake of the shoulders, a slight swing of the hips, but unlike anything most viewers had seen on television. The camera operators, unfamiliar with Elvis's performance style, sometimes struggled to follow him as he moved across the stage. The director stayed primarily with medium and long shots, not yet focusing on the hip movements that would later become so controversial. The audience reaction was mixed. The live studio audience, accustomed to the Dorseys' big band sound, responded with polite applause, interspersed with audible gasps and nervous laughter. Tommy Dorsey, a musical traditionalist, reportedly remarked, backaged, "The kid's good, but what the hell is he doing?" Reviews of Elvis's stage show debut were limited, but telling. Billboard noted that Elvis wiggled and wriggled with abandon, while the New York Times dismissed him as a momentary phenomenon. Neither prediction proved accurate. Elvis was neither as wild as his critics feared, nor as fleeting as they hoped. What makes the Dorsey appearances historically significant is their rawness. Elvis had not yet been coached on how to modify his performance for television. Network executives hadn't yet intervened to censor his movements. Viewers were seeing Elvis as he performed in the rural southern venues where he had developed his style. The stage show appearances also marked the television debut of DJ Fontana on drums and Bill Black on bass, along with guitarist Scotty Moore. This was the original Elvis sound, more rhythm and blues than the pop sound he would later develop. The musical arrangements were loose, sometimes ragged, capturing the energy of early rock and roll before it was polished for mass consumption. By his 6th and final stage show appearance, on March 24, 1956, Elvis had refined his television persona. His movements were more deliberate, his interaction with the camera more conscious. He had learned how television could amplify his appeal, and viewing figures for the stage show had steadily increased with each of his appearances. The Dorsey Brothers' stage show never achieved the ratings of its competitors and was canceled in 1957. But it had served its purpose for Elvis, providing him with crucial national exposure and television experience before his career-defining appearances on Milton Berle and Ed Sullivan's programs. Number 4. The Tonight Show with Steve Allen. Second appearance, January 6, 1957. 6 months after the humiliating hound dog performance with the Basset Hound, Elvis returned to Steve Allen's show. This time, Elvis wasn't on The Steve Allen Show, but on Tonight, America After Dark, the precursor to The Tonight Show, which Allen was hosting at the time. The circumstances were different, but the underlying tension remained. This lesser-known appearance occurred during a pivotal time in Elvis's career. His first film, Love Me Tender, had just been released in November 1956. he had completed his controversial Ed Sullivan appearances. Elvis was now not just a music sensation, but a multimedia star with significant power in the entertainment industry. Alan, perhaps recognizing Elvis's increased leverage, treated him with more respect during this appearance. Elvis performed "Don't Be Cruel" and "Love Me Tender" without any comedic props or stunts. He was allowed to wear his own performance clothing rather than a tuxedo, though his outfit was notably more conservative than his usual stage attire. The performance itself was subdued by Elvis standards. He stood relatively still, focusing on his vocals rather than physical movements. Whether this was a concession to Alan or a deliberate choice by Elvis to showcase his musicality remains debated by Elvis historians. What makes this appearance particularly interesting is the brief interview segment. Alan asked Elvis about the controversy surrounding his performances, giving Elvis a rare opportunity to address the criticism directly on television. Elvis responded with his characteristic mix of humility and defiance. "I don't feel like I do anything wrong. I just sing and move around to the music." Behind the scenes, the network was still nervous. NBC executives had instructed camera operators to keep wide shots when Elvis performed and to avoid close-ups of his lower body. The control room was prepared to cut away if Elvis's movements became too suggestive. These precautions proved unnecessary, as Elvis delivered a restrained performance. The audience reaction was telling of Elvis's changed status. Where the previous year's audience had laughed at Elvis, this audience screamed and applauded for him. Several young women in the front rows visibly swooned, with NBC security guards positioned to prevent them from rushing the stage. Ratings for this appearance were strong, though not as dramatic as the previous year's ratings coup. What changed was the press reaction. Critics who had praised Alan for taming Elvis now accused him of capitulating to popular taste. The New York Herald Tribune wrote, "Alan appears to have joined the Presley bandwagon, sacrificing his principles for ratings." Alan, responding to such criticism, maintained that he had always respected Elvis as a performer, while objecting to certain aspects of his performance style. In a radio interview the following week, Alan said, "Elvis has proven himself to be an entertainer who can work within the standards of network television. That's all I ever asked." For Elvis, this appearance represented a form of redemption after the Basset Hound incident. He had returned to Alan's show on more equal footing and demonstrated his versatility as a performer. Yet the compromise in his performance style foreshadowed the career path ahead, increasing commercial success paired with decreasing artistic freedom. Colonel Parker, as always, focused on the financial and publicity benefits. After the show, he told reporters, "Elvis is versatile. He can do any kind of show and please any audience." This vision of Elvis as an all-around entertainer rather than a rock and roll rebel would guide Parker's management decisions for years to come. Number 3. The Jackie Gleason Stage Show, June 5, 1956. In what Elvis historian Peter Gurunik calls the forgotten appearance, Elvis performed on Jackie Gleason's variety program just days after his controversial Milton Berle appearance. The timing made this performance particularly charged, as America was still reeling from what many viewed as Elvis's vulgar display on the Berle show. Gleason, a television powerhouse with substantial creative control over his program, took a calculated risk in having Elvis appear. CBS executives expressed serious concerns, with one programming director reportedly telling Gleason, You're putting your reputation on the line by associating with this Presley character. Gleason, known for his instinct for talent and willingness to buck convention, reportedly responded, "The kid's got something. Maybe I don't understand it, but my teenage daughter sure does." This pragmatic recognition of Elvis's appeal to younger viewers exemplified the generation gap that Elvis was exposing in American culture. The circumstances of Elvis's booking were unusual. He had not been scheduled to appear on Gleason's show but was added just days before the broadcast. This last-minute addition has led to speculation that Colonel Parker deliberately sought this appearance to capitalize on the controversy generated by the Burl show. For the performance itself, Elvis chose to sing "Heartbreak Hotel" and a cover of Ray Charles's "I Got a Woman." Notably, these were the same songs he had performed on the Burley show, suggesting a deliberate choice to present the same material in a more controlled environment. The production team at CB's implemented restrictions that would become standard for Elvis's television appearances. Camera operators were instructed to keep Elvis framed from the chest up during most of the performance. The lighting design was modified to cast Elvis's lower body in shadow. Even his microphone placement was strategic, positioned to partially obscure his hip movements from certain camera angles. Despite these precautions, Elvis did not entirely restrain himself. During instrumental breaks in Heartbreak Hotel, he executed several of his signature moves, though with less intensity than on the Burl show. The studio audience reaction was mixed with screams from younger audience members contrasting with visible discomfort from older viewers. Gleason's introduction of Elvis reflected the entertainment establishment's ambivalence. He introduced Elvis as the young man who has caused quite a sensation in our business, neither fully endorsing nor criticizing the performer. After Elvis's performance, Gleason engaged him in a brief, somewhat awkward conversation that focused on Elvis's rapid rise to fame rather than the controversy surrounding his performance style. The critical reaction to Elvis's appearance on Gleason's show was subdued compared to the firestorm that followed the Burl appearance. Variety noted that Elvis showed more restraint, while the New York Daily News observed that Presley appeared to have been briefed on television standards and practices. What makes this appearance historically significant is how it demonstrated the television industry's approach to containing controversial content without losing its commercial appeal. Elvis was presented as a slightly cinemated version of himself, still exciting enough to draw viewers but modified enough to avoid alienating advertisers and older audience members. For Elvis, the Gleason appearance represented an early lesson in the compromises fame would require. He later told Memphis Press that he felt straitjacketed during the performance. Yet he recognized the value of the exposure and the necessity of adapting to television's requirements. The Gleason appearance has received less attention than Elvis's other early television performances, largely because it has been less frequently rebroadcast. The kinescope recording of the show remained in CB's archives until the 1990s, when it was finally included in retrospective documentaries about Elvis's career. Number 2. The Ed Sullivan Show, September 9th, October 28th, and January 6th, 1957. I will never have that Presley fellow on my program. Ed Sullivan's declaration came after watching Elvis on the Milton Berle Show. Yet, just months later, Sullivan signed Elvis for an unprecedented 3 appearances at $50,000, the largest amount ever paid to a performer for television appearances at that time. What changed Sullivan's mind? Competition and ratings. When Elvis appeared on Steve Allen's show opposite Sullivan's in June 1956, Allen's ratings beat Sullivan's, one of the few times this happened in television history. Sullivan, the consummate showman, recognized that his personal distaste for Elvis's performance style was less important than giving audiences what they wanted. The first Sullivan appearance, on September 9, 1956, occurred under unusual circumstances. Sullivan himself was absent, recovering from a serious car accident. Actor Charles Laughton hosted the show that night, introducing Elvis, who was actually performing remotely from CB's studios in Hollywood, while the main show broadcast from New York. This technical arrangement created a unique dynamic. Elvis performed "Don't Be Cruel," "Love Me Tender," "Ready Teddy," and "Hound Dog" with his full band and backup singers, the Jordanaires. The remote location may have given Elvis more comfort and control than he would have had on Sullivan's New York stage. The audience response was unprecedented. An estimated 60 million viewers, 82.6% of the television viewing audience, watched Elvis that night, making it one of the most watched television events of the decade. Sullivan's program received 15,000 letters about Elvis's performance, split almost evenly between praise and condemnation. For his second appearance on October 28, 1956, Elvis performed in Sullivan's New York studio. Sullivan, now recovered, introduced Elvis enthusiastically as a real decent, fine boy. This public endorsement from America's most trusted variety show host provided Elvis with a level of legitimacy he had not previously enjoyed on television. During this appearance, the cameras still showed Elvis's full body during his performances of "Don't Be Cruel," "Love Me Baby," and "Hound Dog." His movements were somewhat restrained compared to his Burl appearance, but still recognizably Elvis. Sullivan, watching from the wings, apparently became concerned as the audience reaction intensified during the performance. The third and most controversial Sullivan appearance came on January 6, 1957. For this show, CBS and Sullivan's producers made the now infamous decision to film Elvis only from the waist up. Sullivan introduced the restriction on air, saying, "Tonight we've got a really big show, and I mean really big, Elvis Presley. But he'll be shown from right here up." Sullivan gestured to his waist as the audience laughed and cheered. Elvis performed "Hound Dog," "Love Me Tender," "Don't Be Cruel," "Too Much," "When My Blue Moon Turns to Gold Again," and "Peace in the Valley." The camera restrictions were strictly enforced during the rock numbers, though interestingly, Elvis was shown full body during his performance of the gospel song "Peace in the Valley." This selective censorship revealed the moral assumptions underlying the controversy. Elvis's hip movements were deemed inappropriate when performing secular rock and roll, but acceptable when singing religious music. Sullivan himself emphasized this distinction, telling viewers after Elvis's gospel performance, "This is a real decent fine boy. We've never had a pleasanter experience with a big name than we've had with you." This comment has been extensively analyzed by cultural historians. Was Sullivan genuinely impressed by Elvis's politeness backstage? Was he responding to pressure from religious viewers who had criticized the show for featuring Elvis? Or was this an early example of the entertainment industry trying to make rock and roll more palatable by emphasizing the respectability of its performers? What's often overlooked about the third Sullivan appearance is that it marked the end of Elvis's early television career. After January 1957, Elvis would not appear on American television again until the 1968 comeback special, more than a decade later. His absence from television coincided with his focus on movies and his military service, but also reflected a strategic decision by Colonel Parker to make Elvis less accessible and therefore more valuable. The Sullivan appearances transformed Elvis from a controversial regional performer into a national phenomenon. Sullivan's stamp of approval, however reluctantly given, helped Elvis transcend the initial moral panic his performances had caused. The estimated total viewership for the three appearances exceeded 120 million people, an astonishing figure in a nation that then had a population of about 165 million. Number 1. The Milton Berle Show, June 5, 1956. On a warm Tuesday evening in June 1956, Elvis Presley changed American television forever. His appearance on The Milton Berle Show, broadcast live from the NBC studios in Burbank, California, marked the exact moment when Elvis transformed from a rising musical star into a full-blown cultural phenomenon and controversy. What made this appearance different from his earlier television performances was one simple production decision. Elvis performed without his guitar. On previous TV appearances, Elvis had held his guitar throughout his performances, which naturally limited his movement. For the Berle Show, Elvis decided to perform Hound Dog without this restriction. The result was electrifying and shocking. Freed from his guitar, Elvis moved as he did in his live concerts, swiveling his hips, shaking his legs, and gyrating in a way that television audiences had never seen before. During an extended instrumental break in Hound Dog, Elvis slowed the tempo dramatically and exaggerated his movements, punctuating the music with thrusts of his pelvis that brought screams from the studio audience. The camera work for this performance is historically significant. Unlike later shows that would restrict camera angles, the Milton Berle Show captured Elvis's full-body movements. Multiple cameras showed Elvis from different angles, including several full-body shots that clearly displayed the hip movements that would become so controversial. Berle himself seemed to recognize the historical significance of the moment. A veteran performer with impeccable instincts for audience reaction, Berle watched from the side of the stage with a knowing smile. After the performance, Berle hugged Elvis and jokingly imitated his movements, telling the audience, "I didn't know we had it in us, did you, Elvis?" The immediate audience reaction was intense. The studio audience, particularly the younger members, responded with screams and applause. NBC reported that the switchboards lit up immediately after the performance, with calls running approximately 10-1 against Elvis, many callers demanding that he never be allowed on television again. The press reaction was swift and vicious. Jack Gould of the New York Times wrote, "Mr. Presley has no discernible singing ability. His specialty is rhythm, songs which he renders in an undistinguished delivery, while making up for vocal shortcomings." Ben Gross of the New York Daily News called Elvis a male Lola Brigida, whose writhing makes you turn away in embarrassment. Religious leaders were particularly outspoken. The Catholic Church's weekly magazine, America, called Elvis a sexhibitionist and declared his performance a strip tease with clothes on. Several Protestant ministers devoted Sunday sermons to condemning Elvis, with one Memphis preacher declaring that the belief of the Christian church is against this kind of gyrating. The controversy extended beyond religious and critical circles. Parents across America expressed concern about Elvis's influence on their children. PETA groups passed resolutions condemning the performance. Some radio stations banned Elvis's music, and at least one DJ was reportedly fired for playing Hound after his station manager had banned Elvis's recordings. Behind the scenes at NBC, the reaction was equally dramatic. Network executives held emergency meetings to discuss whether Elvis should be banned from future appearances. Sponsors expressed concern about being associated with such controversial content. The Network Standards and Practices Department developed new guidelines for musical performances that would be applied to Elvis's future television appearances. For Colonel Parker, the controversy was a gift. Record sales for Hound soared in the weeks following the Burl appearance. Parker received dozens of offers for Elvis appearances, allowing him to negotiate the record-breaking $50,000 fee from Ed Sullivan. Parker's famous quote to a reporter, "I don't know what the fuss is about. Elvis is just singing to the beat," downplayed the controversy while keeping it in the headlines. For Elvis himself, the reaction was more complex. In private, he expressed surprise at the intensity of the criticism. To Memphis press, Elvis defended himself. "I'm not trying to be vulgar. I'm not trying to sell any sex. I just get rhythm with the music. I jump around to the music because I enjoy what I'm doing." What's often overlooked is that Elvis performed a second song on The Burl Show. After Hound Dog, he sang a tender rendition of "I Want You, I Need You, I Love You," standing relatively still at the microphone. This juxtaposition of the wild rock performance and the controlled ballad demonstrated Elvis's versatility, and perhaps was an early attempt to broaden his appeal beyond the teenage audience. The Milton Berle Show appearance represents the moment when Elvis became more than a musician. He became a cultural battlefield. The reaction revealed deep generational divides in American society, tensions between traditional values and emerging youth culture, and discomfort with expressions of sexuality in popular entertainment. Television executives learned from the controversy. Future Elvis appearances would be more carefully managed, with restrictions on camera angles and movements. The medium of television itself was forced to grapple with how to present this new form of entertainment without alienating advertisers or older viewers. In historical terms, the Burl appearance marks a pivotal moment in American cultural history, when rock and roll, youth culture, sexuality, and television all collided in the form of a 21-year-old singer from Memphis. The shockwaves from those few minutes of television performance would continue to reshape American entertainment and social norms for decades to come.